Well, he wasn't there long, less than a year and a half, but former U.S. Senator Ben Sasse went on a spending spree when he became the president of the University of Florida in 2022. As the Florida Alligator reports, Sasse more than tripled his office's expenses, directing millions of university funds into secretive consulting contracts and high-paying positions for his GOP allies. In his first year, Sasse tripled the amount of money spent by his predecessor from $5.6 million to $17.3 million. A majority of the spending surge was driven by lucrative contracts with big-name consulting firms and high-salaried remote positions for Sasse's former U.S. Senate staff and Republican officials. He also tripled the number of staff working for him from 10 to 30. Many of those new employees were paid large salaries and worked out of state. For instance, Sasse hired two of his former Senate staffers, Raymond Sasse and James Wegman, at salaries of $396,000 and $432,000 respectively, who were allowed to work remotely from their homes in the Washington, D.C. area. Sasse, who was Sasse's former Senate chief of staff, was given the job of UF Vice President for Innovation and Partnerships. That's a new position, which did not exist under previous administration. Wegman, Sasse's former Senate Communications Director, became UF's Vice President of Communications, making $160,000 more than the person who previously held that position. Wendy, that's just the tip of the iceberg, too. There's a whole lot more, but this was good reporting by the independent campus newspaper, the Florida Alligator. What else in the story stood out to you?
Well, for one thing, Rob, a couple of points. This is a pretty good example of what you might call alternative but respectable news sources that are springing up lately in the decline of the newspaper establishment. This is a major investigative story. Did it come from the Miami Herald, from the Associated Press? No, it came from, of all places, a student newspaper, which is pretty incredible. The other point that really struck me about it was this duplicates what's been happening recently in higher education, where high-level positions, respectable positions at remarkably large salaries are going not to people who have credentials or qualifications in higher education, but who are politically connected. The obvious example, Richard Corcoran at New College, making more than double what his predecessor made. Corcoran's history is as a lobbyist. He was a political appointee as Secretary of Education. He hired a former political operative and lobbyist, David Rancourt, as Dean of Students with no experience in higher ed, and the presidents of Florida Poly, State College of Florida, Manatee, Sarasota, South Florida State College, recently all chosen for political connections rather than for qualifications.
Okay, that's a good question. So where does the buck stop? I mean, do you blame the university boards, or do you blame somebody higher up, Joe, for kind of looking the other way when this spending goes out of control?
Well, first off, I want to commend the author of that story, Garrett Shanley. I would imagine that he's going to get several lucrative high-level job offers, and bravo, well done. To go to your question, yes, there is a lot of blame to go around on this, but let's go back to when Ben Sasse was hired initially. It was rushed through. He was the only candidate up for consideration.
A lot of it was in secret.
It was done definitely in the shadows. It has Ron DeSantis' fingerprints all over it, even though he says, oh, I had nothing to do with it. I have a bridge I want to sell you if you believe that. And what this does is it's not only a scandal about money, but it goes to the credibility of the state's flagship university. And that, for that reason alone, you know, DeSantis and all the rest, we're going to investigate this. You should have done it before a student journalist beat you to it.
Well, this kind of spending, Rosemary, is not done without the knowledge of the board. You know, every board passes a budget and okays things. $633,000 for travel, which is 20 times what the previous president spent. That's incredible.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the board, which is politically appointed, the governor appoints them, was definitely asleep at the wheel as this gravy train from Washington to Gainesville was allowed to play out. Coincidentally, the day the story broke, I got this letter in the mail. I'm a Gator, asking me for a donation and thanking me for my donations. And I'm like, you know, gee, if they have this kind of money to spend, I'm just a small-time donor, but you got to imagine the big-time donors think that you can go from spending $5 million in the president's office to $17 million in the course of 1 year, hiring all your old staff at salaries over $400,000. No, it was just a runaway train. The board, the board definitely deserves. I mean, they ought to resign. They ought to resign for their failure to do due diligence over the university at a time when students are paying record tuition and have student debt. That this was allowed to happen does, as Joe said, it all falls back on the governor.
So who would it be up to? No crimes were alleged here. It's just out of control spending. So who would be the proper place to get this investigated? Where would you go? I mean, if you're part of Gator Nation and you're concerned that your college is spending oodles of money on people that work from home in Washington, D.C., who do you complain to and who do you say, hey, fix that?
That's the function of the trustees. That's the function of the board. They're the oversight. They're the board of directors, if you will, of the university. And if they weren't looking at this and raising questions, shame on them. You know, this
and
was
who are the trustees appointed by?
the governor.
Most of them, since about the late 1990s.
So, you know, if Sasse needs another job after this, perhaps he can assume the chair of cronyism in the public corruption department. This is cronyism at its worst, and to just waste this public money. And as an employee of the state university system, I simply want to know how do I get one of those jobs?
Yeah, how do you work from home for $400,000 a year?
And CFO Jimmy Patronis has said that he's going to investigate. And today, I guess the governor is saying, oh, he wants somebody to look too. But it's the wolf, you know, guarding the hen house.
They're outraged to find the gambling's going on in this establishment.
So an investigative website called The Lever looked at the DeSantis administration, and it looked at the way that contracts were given to invest state employee pension money. It was given to political insiders, and that the state pension plan could have done much better had it not been given to insiders, just to invest in index funds. Another time, the Tampa Bay Times reported that DeSantis used a politically connected vendor to help fly migrants from Texas to Massachusetts 2 years ago. So is this something that is going on kind of under the radar, that if you're politically connected, this administration will help you out?
It's not really under the radar. It's been out there, it's exposed, everybody knows it.
You know, the other outrage is that he spent $7 million on contracts to consultants. And in one case,
he had worked at.
For a company, McKinsey, over $5 million to McKinsey. And we'll never know what that contract was for, because the legislature has chipped away at Florida's once vanguard Sunshine Law. And so now contracts to consultants are protected by trade secrets. So we'll never know. Well, trade secrets is an exemption to the public records law, and it's used wildly.
And Sasse's resignation is suspect. He said he resigned because his wife was recently diagnosed with epilepsy, and I'm sorry about that. I mean, I'm not making light of that at all. But the University of Florida, I would imagine, has some really good experts on treating epilepsy, where he could have continued to do his job if he wasn't up to his neck in money. And his
the
wife would
resignation
get to care of
was so sudden.
Yeah.
One strongly suspects, though one does not know, that the resignation may have occurred right about the time that the public records requests were coming from the independent alligator about this story, that those public records requests were being made to the president's office for the documents that back
Try
this
to
up.
beat the sheriff to the county line on that one.